allow me to congratulate her for organizing such an educating and uplifting conference. I think persons like Herb and the likes of Dr. Eva Hudson, Rolf Commission and the Big Conversation, Kevin Lameau, all of these individuals and organizations do their part collectively and individually to help to address the issues of racism here in Bermuda, help to dismantle it and identify solutions. And I have to commend them for their efforts and their hard work. Please also allow me to extend a warm Bermuda welcome to all of the participants that are here today, as well as in particular the keynote speaker, author, and litigator, Dr. Michelle Alexander. Now, as a Black woman, the issue of racial justice in Bermuda commands my attention on many levels. It confronts me with the inescapable fact that Bermuda began as a society of extreme racial injustice. On this level, I am indebted to those generations preceding me who did not relent in their uncompromising struggle to champion the cause we are trying to move forward to today. And as Attorney General and Minister of Justice, the topic of this conference, racial justice, Bermuda's criminal justice system, intent and impact, also resonates with me. For starters, our present government is derived from a political party that was forged as an extension of the struggle to bring about racial justice in this country. And in 1963, when the PLP was officially launched, the senior people in the room will know that those 7 individuals who helped form the party were talking about racial justice at a time when other persons, they were courageously talking about it at a time when other persons were not prepared to do so, and they were prepared to challenge the status quo. And as we gather here today, it would do us well to reflect upon how far we have come, given the relative complacency with which we are able to broach the subject in our time. Yet ironically, the very fact that we're here still raising the subject on this platform should say to us that whereas the backbreaking work of our foreparents of bringing the issue to the fore and to put it into our national agenda is done, this enormous challenge of making racial justice a fait accompli falls to our generation and to those who we empower to take up the mantle behind us. Traditionally, there are 6 elements or prongs of the criminal justice system, and they are the legislature, which passes the laws, law enforcement, which is tasked with gathering evidence and apprehending and charging those reasonably suspected of breaking the law, the prosecution, which presents the evidence to the courts, the defense lawyers who advocate on behalf of those charged, the judiciary, which interpret the laws and hand down penalties in accordance with it, and the prisons where criminal lawbreakers are detained to protect society. Now, I assert the debatable point that Bermuda's domestic lawmakers grudgingly embarked upon the path of legislative racial justice with the passage of the Emancipation Act of 1834. Now, for all its failings, that it was the first enactment to recognize that the non-white peoples of Bermuda are human beings in the eyes of the law. The next great legislative leap towards racial justice did not occur until the United Kingdom's Parliament passed the Bermuda Constitution Order 1968. Our Constitution mandates that it is our fundamental right to not be discriminated against on the grounds of race, to not be arbitrarily arrested, to be afforded a fair hearing, and to be presumed innocent of criminal offenses until proven guilty by a court of law. The Legal Aid Act of 1980 provided for public financing of the cost of the defense of those criminally charged who cannot afford it. And the Human Rights Act of 1981 ultimately made it a criminal offense for a person to discriminate against another on the basis of race, as well as a number of other grounds. Law enforcement in this country has a long and checkered past, from the time when Black Bermudians were barred from serving on the police force to when we were categorically excluded from the senior ranks of the service. That problem has been statutorily rectified with a visible and measurable difference in the present demographics of the Bermuda Police Service. Likewise, the racial composition of the Bermudian judiciary today cannot be said to reflect the racially segregated judiciary of times past. The same can also be said of the management of our penal institutions. And yet, in spite of all that we can legitimately and boastfully point to as the safeguards Bermuda has involved in to bring about racial justice within the criminal justice system, we face the paradox of statistical condemnation. Our jurisdiction ranks amongst the highest per capita incarceration rates in the world. Currently 42 inmates per 10,000 population as compared to the United States, which is the highest ranking, 58 in Russia and 12 in Canada. And this figure catapults to 73% of 10,000 of the Black Bermudian population to be on par with the United States national ratio. In our prisons today, over 93% of the approximately 266 inmate population is Black, as compared to Blacks being 64% of our overall population in Bermuda, which is about 64,000. We all know the social economic correlation between these factors. The weight of underclass existence in our society ultimately manifests itself in the kinds of environmental risk factors that lead to criminal activity: school dropout, single parenting, substance abuse, the neighborhoods in which we live, and even our family history of criminal involvement, contributing factors to the odds of running afoul of the law. We also cannot ignore the presence of historically persistent racial prejudices, often in the minds of those entrusted to enforce and uphold the laws, compounded by pervasive negative racial stereotypes amongst those who break them. We know that racial injustice was achieved through a process of systematic disenfranchisement, impoverishment, social disruption, educational barriers, and a host of other injustices that continue to haunt our society. Ultimately, therefore, the pursuit of racial justice through the criminal justice system leads to the realization that achieving a just society cannot be attained by an insular approach. I took this opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into the etymology of the word justice, and sometimes it's our failure to actually appreciate the underpinnings of language that prevents us from finding solutions to our most complex problems. Now, the English version of the word is derived from a Latin root meaning uprightness, and through the French derivative, righteousness and equality. Before we arrive at the original English usage to mean the exercise of authority in vindication of right by assigning reward or punishment. Now, at its root, then, justice is a holistic concept that must first grapple with the question, what right is it to be vindicated? By failing to appreciate this, we erroneously compartmentalize and speak of justice here versus justice there. In other words, the criminal justice system, I submit, cannot singularly bring about a just society. The injustice it reflects may not necessarily be the injustice it practices or creates. This is in no way exonerates persons in my capacity from accounting for the difficult policy decisions often reflected in laws intended to counteract crime. By example, I draw your attention to the 2005 and 2010 offensive weapons prohibition added to Part 17 of the Criminal Code, starting at Section 315A. They bequeath broad powers to law enforcement to conduct random stop and searches for weapons, take out different areas for extended periods of time, and even order the removal of clothing intended to conceal one's identity. Now, despite the checks and balances that we have put in the legislation so as to minimize the abuse that could potentially befall, such as time restrictions, officer ranks for the approval and exercise of the authority, the disclosure provisions, the concerns expressed about such powers are that they allow for racial profiling and the harassment of young and not so young Black males. These concerns rely on the inconvenient truth, such as the fact that quarterly firearm incidents rose as much as 350% between 2009 and 2011, with the corresponding proportion of injuries and fatalities. The other sobering reality is that 100% of the victims of gun violence in our society in recent years are Black males. By the same token, 100% of those prosecuted for gun crimes are also Black males. Our society, like never before in history, has been besieged by altercations between rival groups and individuals for reasons that we are challenged to understand, yet at the same time we are compelled to respond to. Therefore, when the armed would-be assailant or shooter is apprehended, prosecuted, and incarcerated, he may graciously add to the damning statistics that rightly say that we have an unjust society. The crime may predictably come about measures taken to avert getting to that point and subsequent ones to correct the individual after the fact. It also cannot be denied that the weight of the problem and the extent of the measures may demand special attention to avert racial abuse. However, we are compelled to concede that the injustice reflected one-dimensionally by the numbers may not necessarily be one with the administration of justice, but the complex factors too often culminating in the twin tragedies of death and incarceration, which in turn contribute to perpetuation of this tragic cycle. Undoubtedly, to achieve a racially just society, we require the system of justice to continue to effect justly targeted law enforcement reform that itself may need reforming from time to time. However, these reforms must be in tandem with every other aspect of society and with all members of society to ensure that our highest aspirations to realize justice everywhere for everyone are achieved. I'd like to leave you with a quote from Frederick Douglass. Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is in an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. We owe it to ourselves here in Bermuda to each do our own part to make sure that we are vigilant beyond accusation and achieve beyond condemnation to protect our society from this fate. With that, I thank you, and I applaud your aspirations for this conference. Thank you.